You know how to book flights and hotels. All you're missing is a tool to plan the travel experiences you'll have once you arrive. That's why you need Viator. Book guided tours, excursions, and more in one place. There are over 300,000 travel experiences to choose from, so you can find something for everyone. And Viator offers free cancellation and 24/7 customer support for worry-free travel. Download the Viator app now and use code Viator10 for 10% off your first booking in the app. Find travel experiences for you. Do more with Viator.
Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus minisodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive minisode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. Today on the podcast, we're going to talk about 12 tips for any of you who are a friend of or a family member of someone who's walked through spiritual abuse. I know that spiritual abuse is something that's understood by some, not understood by some, and experienced by, unfortunately, way too many. And if you are a person who knows someone who's walking through spiritual abuse, I really encourage you to listen in deeply today to what we're going to talk about. And I really hope if you know someone who could benefit from this podcast that you would share it with a friend. There's so much we can learn about how to come around and be supportive village for people who are walking through spiritual abuse and religious trauma. And today, I'm just going to share with you some of the best tips that I have found to help people walk through this. So stay tuned for what we have today. This episode could really help your friend. We are here today to talk about how we can support spiritual abuse survivors. And this is a heavy topic. I know many of you are tuning in because you don't even know what spiritual abuse is. And some of you have walked through it personally. And some of you have friends that have used that phrase, or you're wondering if that's what is going on. And as we have just celebrated Holy Week and we walked through what it was like for those who follow Jesus and are part of the Christian tradition in its various forms around the world in the global church, many of us are familiar with that story of what it meant for Jesus to be abused by his own religious faith community that raised him, both physically and spiritually, and many other ways where he experienced belittling, intimidation, name calling in some ways, just, many abusive experiences that Jesus himself walked through. And yet we find ourselves today in the United States here where I live, and stories of spiritual abuse just keep coming. And for me, as a spiritual abuse survivor, along with my husband, we have shared our story here on the A World of Difference podcast and has spoken on some other podcasts about our experience. But if you haven't listened to the Our Story series that my husband and I did last fall, I would encourage you to check that out as well. But today is a bit of a follow-up. Many of you ask how my husband Jason and I are doing 2 years on from being fired for the moment my husband called out abuse. And in retaliation, we were fired just for my husband saying that in that exact moment, given NDAs tied to severance and medical insurance for our family. but we didn't sign that NDA and just walk through that process. And you can check out that story of what we walked through. But I wanted to focus today on the question I get from some of you is, how can I support people that I know that have walked through spiritual abuse and are currently walking through that? I myself have 2 friends in this past week who are pastors on staff at 2 different churches who were fired and had walked through, prior to being fired and even in the moment of being fired, a lot of those kinds of things that are spiritually abusive that I mentioned earlier that Jesus himself walked through, but, maybe in a less intensity, of course, but just the belittling, the intimidation, the coercion, the bullying, all those things are present in these stories, unfortunately. And my husband and I had time last week to sit with our friend. Her story is one of it's shock. She didn't see it coming, and I didn't see mine coming either. And a lot of us don't. And so sharing a meal with people is so important. But we're going to walk through a list of about 12 things today that you can do, practical things you can do with your friends who are walking through this. And the first and foremost is really just to listen. So if you hear nothing else today, do this. Sit and listen with your friend who's walking through spiritual abuse, because the most important thing you can do for a spiritual abuse survivor is to listen to them, deeply listen to them, and let them know that you hear them, you believe them, you empathize with them, and you stand with them in support. Allow them to share their story and their experiences without judgment as many times as it takes. And that's the hard part, because trauma does something very unique to the brain, and it is hard to process the unfathomable. And walking through trauma, especially complex trauma, my husband and I were both diagnosed with complex PTSD, otherwise known as CPTSD, because it wasn't just one instance, but it was multiple instances. And then even in the aftermath, we kept experiencing some things. And so the nature of any trauma, whether it's complex trauma or a one-time event, is that both the brain is processing it in a very unique way, and the body itself keeps the score. Dr. Diane Langberg, who I highly recommend if you don't know her work, has written a book called Redeeming Power. But she also is pretty active on Twitter and just giving little tidbits of what's helpful. She has a quote that says, "Bearing the intensity of emotions is impossible. And so the feelings must be tried on again and again. And so we need to be patient, and then be patient some more. Telling and retelling helps to reduce the memory and its size." And so here's the good news. As a friend of somebody who's walking through this, you can be a healer for your friend just by letting them tell their story again and again, as many times as it takes. And the next thing is to validate their feelings. So it's not just listening, but to just, repeat back and say, that makes sense that you would feel that way. A spiritual abuse survivor can feel confused, angry, full of shame. Many see this through the filter of shame. And often if a narcissist has been the one to abuse them, that's the intended response, is that they would feel shame. Survivors often feel self-doubt and fear. They question why they did or didn't see the red flags or pay attention to them. So it's important just to acknowledge their feelings and let them know that what they went through was not their fault. You can be an incredibly intelligent person. In fact, some of the studies indicate that often people who are targeted have a high level of intelligence. When you look at David Koresh and his cult in Waco, Texas, he had somebody from Harvard in there. I mean, the part of the brain that gets manipulated psychologically oftentimes in these abuse scenarios has nothing to do with your academic intelligence or your ability to be smart in other areas. So it's important to just tell your friend it's not their fault. And as our therapist has told us over and over again, and many of the other survivors of abuse from Echo Church that our therapist has worked with over many years, reminds us often, it was designed for you not to see it. And that's really the truth. So anybody could fall for this kind of thing, and just remind your friend that what they feel is normal, and it's okay to feel whatever they feel. And then the next thing is to encourage and support self-care. This is really hard for spiritual abuse survivors, and they may struggle with their self-worth and have difficulty practicing self-care because the brain is so focused on trying to process this shock. And encourage them to care for themselves, whether it's through exercise or meditation, prayer, therapy, other healthy activities like eating healthy food, and just be sensitive to anything that might be triggering to them. And you might be surprised at what is, and that's okay, because they're still processing. And the sixth thing is just to connect them with resources. They're going to have trouble processing anything in their life right now except this, because it's a huge thing. Their life has just been blown up. So provide them with resources such as support groups, maybe of others who have survived abuse at your church, others who have survived spiritual abuse, religious trauma, or cults in other areas. Online, maybe a therapist. They're going to need a good therapist, maybe more than one, and books on spiritual abuse to help them heal. I have many books in my link tree that were helpful to me, and I've had many of those authors that I've interviewed here on the podcast. One is A Church Called Tove by Scott McKnight and Laura Barringer. And so their initial episode aired in February 2021. And then I had Dr. Chuck DeGroat on. He wrote a book called When Narcissism Comes to Church, and he did his PhD dissertation around this topic, researching it. We also had Dr. Wade Mullen on the show, who also did his PhD research around this topic, and he wrote a book called Something's Not Right. And then, as I mentioned, Dr. Diane Lamberg, who is a researcher on abuse and trauma and has worked for many years as a therapist around the area of abuse in its many forms, but in particular spiritual abuse. So check out my link tree, Lori Adams Brown link tree, for that information if you want to see what those books are. And also listen to the podcast episodes where we sort of talk about those books here and help you see it in a high level view. But as you're connecting people with resources, I also would recommend Kaneo cohorts. My husband and I just finished a 6-month Kaneo cohort where we walk through weekly articles, some of them written by Dr. Chuck DeGroat and others around what it was like to walk in a church setting around these kinds of injuries with a group of people who've experienced something similar. So for 6 months weekly, we interacted with articles and got together on Zoom and discussed them, and then met at the end of the 6 months at the retreat center that Kaneo has in Puerto Rico in the rainforest, where we had several days together. And that was the culmination of this cohort. But I highly recommend Kaneo and Dan White Jr. and Tanya White, who have created this beautiful space for people to heal together in community. But also I recommend Joe Saxton's leadership cohort, and that's been really helpful for me over the last couple of years. And I also recommend Hagar's Voice as a resource that's based in Canada, and they are advocates for spiritual abuse survivors and survivors of all kinds of abuse that happen in the church. And then I would say, as a friend of somebody who's walking through spiritual abuse, please do them the favor and yourself the favor by educating yourself. Don't expect them to be the one to educate you. They're dealing with enough right now. And so just spend some time learning about spiritual abuse and the impact it can have on survivors. This will really help you better understand your friends' experiences and provide better support for them. And I would just encourage you to do something simple, like follow the hashtag spiritual abuse on Twitter and just listen. Don't comment, or maybe except for like with a broken heart emoji, for a while, and learn to just center survivors' voices in a world where perpetrators and those who abuse often get centered instead with microphones, stages, book deals, the benefit of the doubt that they're given by their other pastor and leader friends oftentimes, or their board. And often the empathy, which if you're not familiar with that term, just really means we often extend empathy to the man who abused as if he is the victim or martyr, and don't center the survivor who's walking through hell and trying to pick up the pieces of their lives with very little support. And, in often cases, like a couple of my friends that were fired over the past week, that they don't even have a job. And so they're trying to figure out financially for their family how they're going to move forward. And so this really compounds the abuse and re-traumatizes the survivors when the abuser and the perpetrator get centered and a lot of sympathy for the abuser instead of what they need, which is a lot of support and empathy to heal. So, and also respect their boundaries. This is really key because spiritual abuse survivors may need time and space to heal. And they also need you to respect their boundaries and allow them to take things at their own pace and follow their lead. They have been pushed and bullied and coerced and silenced, and they need to find their agency again. And that takes time. So, just really respect their space and their process. And then number 12 is be patient and understanding. Recovery from spiritual abuse can be a long and challenging process, much longer than most realize or their community allows usually. And so be patient and understanding and let them know that you are there for them for the long haul of their journey of recovery. And another thing to remember here is to avoid the forgiveness as a weapon trap. Many spiritual abuse survivors, myself included, had people in the faith community use forgiveness as a weapon, as if there was this microscope on them, asking them, have you forgiven? Are you bitter? And instead of focusing on the one who did the abuse and, calling them to repentance, calling them to have true, deep remorse and apology and turn from their sin and, change their hearts and lives. Oftentimes that feels like too hard for people in the faith community to imagine that would happen from the perpetrator or the one who abused. So they end up focusing on the very wounded, weak, and vulnerable at this point survivor, and sort of using this, have you forgiven, as a weapon to make everybody feel okay that harmony has been restored. And I would just say it's very inappropriate to ask a survivor if they have forgiven yet. It's sort of really none of your business. It's their personal journey with the Lord. You can pray for them to have that kind of healing in their heart, but that, as my coach and friend Joe Saxton told me early on, forgiveness sometimes should be slow when what was done to you was this big of a deal. And that's not something we often say to each other. The process of forgiveness can take time, and that's okay. But that's really there between them and God, and forgiveness on their part is not necessary for a community itself to heal. And so please don't go to your friend who's been walking through hell on earth and ask them if they've forgiven. Let's just table that, or maybe not mention it again, but pray for them. They definitely need that. And then bring meals to them. They need to eat. Send DoorDash money. Offer to do practical household chores, because sometimes eating can be really hard. I know my husband and I had a lot of trouble eating, and we were forgetting to eat in the first few days of what happened with us. And so having people bring over meals, and our friends, Megan and Victoria in particular, I always shout out to them, because for 10 months straight, they brought meals on a Wednesday night and fed our family with enough for leftovers, and sat with us and talked with us and let us share our story again and again, and processed it with us in a very peaceful and healing way. But yeah, some of those practical things get dropped off because the brain is so focused on healing from trauma, and it can be hard to do just normal life. Offer to babysit if they have a baby or children. Offer to take their daughter to go get pedicures. Megan and Victoria did that for us. Offer to, show her early 2000s movies, which is what they did for my daughter too. Spending the night. She spent the night with them, and just offer to minister to their family in very practical ways. This is hugely helpful as a friend, and you can do this in maybe sit with them and make a list of all the things that need to be done, and be like, here, I could help find people to help you out. Also, I would say replace being a silent bystander with being an advocate on their behalf. So hold the church leadership accountable that did this. Ask the church to release their finances publicly with transparency. Ask how the board governance works, and set up meetings with the board and the leadership of the church to ask questions if that is safe to do so. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes that will put you in a position to be also abused, especially in these one-off meetings they try to have. But if it's safe to do so, hold the church accountable. Also, pay for their therapy, or ask that the church where they were abused pay for it. This is a part of repair. And, when we see things like Zacchaeus went back and paid back what he owed people and more, this is part of what it means to be truly sorry, to make those repairs that are required. So ask the church to pay for the therapy. It's the very least they could do. And then connect them with a good lawyer if you know one. Help them know about the EEOC, where they can report any hostile work environment, harassment, various forms, or discrimination. If there is belittling, bullying, mobbing, coercing, name calling, teasing, all these types of things are often things that can be reported to the EEOC, and many in churches don't do that, but it's actually a way to help protect future survivors if that has been reported and the statute of limitations does pass. So that might be overwhelming because they're just trying to feed their family, get a new job, process this, pick up the pieces of their lives, but that's a role that you could play in maybe helping them find the words, because sometimes the words don't come. And so giving them, the link, or being like, if you talk, I can type, that can dictate to you, whatever support they need to find a way to be helpful to document what happened, so that others don't have to walk through this too again and again. And many church staff aren't familiar with, even these concepts of discrimination, hostile work environment, and various types of harassment. But if you are a person who is and knows a little bit more about that, you can be really helpful to these survivors in that way, or maybe research it yourself. Also, offer to go on hikes with them or walks or to the beach or to do something fun to get fresh air, sunshine, and boost their weary bodies and brains. Because it can be really hard to find the energy sometimes, but processing the trauma through walking or moving your body, especially like bilateral movement, left and right foot, taking steps in a walk around a neighborhood or on a hike or swimming, can often kind of dislodge the part of the brain that's holding the trauma. So EMDR therapy is based on this and the right brain, left brain connection in the aftermath of the abuse of many stories from my former church, Echo Church. Many people have done EMDR therapy for particular flashbacks, nightmares that continue for, even 5 years and beyond. And so, but some of those things can in a smaller way be worked out through just walking and talking, sharing the story while doing these bilateral movements. So, go on hikes and walks and that kind of thing and provide that space for your friend. And then last but not least, don't force them to smile. This is often something I hear people say, especially after what is a perceivable amount of acceptable time has passed. And that could be anything from 2 weeks to 2 years, where some people think it's time to move on and you should be smiling again. Don't force them to find the silver lining or always look on the bright side. Really, the way to hope for them is through lament, to sitting in the pain with curiosity and introspection and really feeling the feelings of it all, feeling through it, right? Sitting in that suffering with curiosity is how they find hope through the lament. And so, but what you can do is help them create memories together with you where they do experience happiness and things that bring a smile to their face in the midst of the recovery with various right brain activities that have been shown to help us work through trauma, like moving our bodies with dance or swimming or feeling the sun on their face while you're outside smelling the flowers at springtime. So the way through is hard. It's very hard. But with you walking with your friend and family member, they will flourish in deep friendship. And I just want to say thank you for caring enough about your friend or your family member that's walking through spiritual abuse. The beautiful part of this is that by sitting with them, listening, hearing their story, believing them and saying, I believe you, and empathizing with them, you can actually help your friend heal. And sticking with them for as long as it takes is really key. So thank you for the work that you are and will do for spiritual survivors. And I would love to hear how this is going for you. So if you're in process with this, reach out to me on Twitter. And if you have any other tips on how to walk alongside spiritual survivors, I would love to hear those too. We can all get better together in this area. And I'm curious to know what's working in your part of the world, wherever you are. Take care, everyone. And thanks for listening. Bye. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper, well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper. And then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/a world of difference.
You know how to book flights and hotels. All you're missing is a tool to plan the travel experiences you'll have once you arrive. That's why you need Viator. Book guided tours, excursions, and more in one place. There are over 300,000 travel experiences to choose from, so you can find something for everyone. And Viator offers free cancellation and 24/7 customer support for worry-free travel. Download the Viator app now and use code Viator10 for 10% off your first booking in the app. Find travel experiences for you. Do more with Viator.